there. I'm glad you could make it today. We are in the book of Exodus, starting in chapter 3. And with this one, there are a lot of bits that go on in the story. And I may be consulting my Bible from time to time because uh, these pieces are important in what happens next. And let's just go ahead and take a look. So, what we have at this point is that you may remember in the last lesson that Moses had actually been raised by the Egyptians, but when he killed an Egyptian who was mistreating Israelites, he had to run for his life. He went far away to Midian, and there he settled down. Well, what we don't find out in the Bible immediately, but we find out later, is that he got there, he marries. Okay, we heard that part. He was 40 years old. Okay, the next thing that happens, 40 years have passed. So Moses is now 80 years old. And what's he doing? He is still working for his father in law. His wife's father had a lot of sheep. He was a priest in Midian, and apparently part of that came with wealth. And it's not uncommon for God to bless people who serve Him. So this all seems to make sense with this. But the fact is, Moses is content to live in a family life working for his father in law. It's perfectly okay, but it's not something that make us think that, oh, this is the guy who's going to be a great leader for Israel. And as you're going to see, um, a lot of people would have had that reaction, including Moses himself. So Moses is tending sheep on what we will later find out is Mount Sinai, and that's going to become significant in future stories. But he's on this mountain, he goes around to the other side and he sees a bush that's on fire. Okay, that's not something you see every day. And he looks a little bit more and he realizes the bush is not being consumed. When things burn, they end up turning to ashes and that all collapses. But this is not happening. So he decides, I'm going to check this out. And he gets there and he hears a voice from within this burning bush saying, Moses, Moses. He says, Here I am. The next thing is, take off your shoes. You're on holy ground. See, what he is now finding out is that God is speaking to him through this bush that's on fire. There's a reference to the angel of the Lord, and often that is seen as being God Himself or some manifestation of God. In any event, off come his sandals. Well, that seems a little odd to us because our culture does not have anything special about that. But in the people of that time, in fact, the people who live in that part of the world to this day, uh, footwear, shoes, sandals, and all that are considered dirty. And so if you want to insult someone, you might take a picture of that person and take your shoe and do the bottom of your shoe against it. I saw that in the news one time. There's also another story of a place where there was a hotel and they had a tile floor that formed the picture of somebody because they want everybody to have to walk on this guy's face as a result of this. And that was to mean an insult. So his shoes are off and he's listening and he finds out, okay, this is God talking to him, the real God. And this God says, okay, got a plan? You're going back to Egypt. You're going to bring my people out. I know what Pharaoh has been doing to them, how he's treating them as slaves and he's been harsh to them. And you're going to bring them out and you're going to bring them back to this mountain. Well, Moses, we find out, is not real up on this plan. He doesn't really like this idea of going back to Egypt, and he doesn't seem to want this leadership role. And his first question is one where he says, well, who am I to to do this? And God says, I'll be with you. Okay, that didn't work. Let's ask another question. He said, okay, when I get to the Israelites, whom should I say sent me? And God says, I am who I am. And we think, okay, God is who he is. But this is significant because he says, I am, in a way that from now on, the Jewish people are going to identify those two words as referring to God. And this comes to play when Jesus is talking to them later on. But what we find here is that Moses, okay, he's got that question answered, and God goes on to say, okay, here's what's going to happen. We're going to bring the people out, and you're going to plunder the Egyptians. The women will ask their neighbors, their Egyptian neighbors, for things, and they'll give it to them. Well, what this all means is that Egypt has been getting free labor from the Israelites all these years, and now Egypt is going to have to pay back Israel for all of this work. And God also says, oh, when you go to the elders of Israel, that means the guys in charge, you talk to them and they will listen to you. They'll be okay with this. They'll believe you. That'll be fine. And there's a part in here where Moses is questioning, and you're not sure if he's talking about the elders of Israel. I think he's really talking about the Egyptians, though, because he says, what if they won't believe me? So he could be talking about the regular people, but I think he's talking about the Egyptians. And says, what if they say that, well, your God hasn't talked to you? And God does something funny. He says, what's in your hand? Moses looks, oh, I've got a staff. He said, throw it on the ground. Moses throws it on the ground, changes into a snake. Moses runs away from it, very sensible. There's a snake, he's getting away from it. And God says, okay, go back and pick it up by the tail. Well, you don't want to do that with a snake. But God's telling him to do this, so he goes, grabs it by the tail, it changes back into his staff. He also gives him a couple of other things to do, like putting his hand inside his cloak and taking it out, and it's all very white but kind of diseased looking, and then you put his hand back in and draw it out, and it's back to the way it's supposed to be. And some other stuff that's a little bit on the gross side is you take some water from the Nile and pour it on the ground, it'll change to blood. So we're going to see how this plays out a little bit later, although it's never mentioned exactly that he had to do the hand thing or the water and blood thing uh, later on for the people, but he may well have done it. The Bible doesn't give us all the details about everything. And so Moses, to this point, has been asking some good questions, and he has another one, and he says, "Okay, I'm not somebody who could speak well, um, and this is really not a question, but it's more of an acknowledgement." He says, "Okay, what about that? I can't speak well." Now, this may have been a legitimate concern because he had learned the Egyptian language as he was growing up in the palace, and the same with Hebrew. But he'd been away for 40 years, and you can forget a language, even one you grew up with, if you don't continue to use it. In fact, I did that myself. I learned a language and knew it okay, but then stopped using it, and I remember very little of it now. And God addresses this and says, don't worry, I'm going to help you out. You'll be fine. Okay, up until this point, Moses has been fine, but now it comes out he doesn't want to do this. And he says, can't you send somebody else? Well, now God is angry because Moses is not asking legitimate questions. It's clear he does not want to do this, even with God's encouragement. And God says, I'm going to send your brother Aaron. heading now. He's going to meet you, and you're going to go with him, and he can do the talking for you. Okay, Aaron's been in Egypt all this time. He's 3 years older than Moses, and this seems to work out. Moses can't get out of it, and so Aaron shows up at the mountain. Moses has gotten his family together, and they head back to Egypt. Well, they go and meet with the elders of Israel. All of that goes pretty well. They really like this because this Pharaoh, this king of Egypt, is a bad guy and has been treating them harshly. Well, it's about to get worse. Moses and Aaron go to Pharaoh and they say, our God has sent us to tell you, let our people go. We want to go out into the desert for 3 days and then come back. Now, it may be that was a 3 day trip to get out there, and it may have taken longer than 3 days, but you get the idea on all this. We want to go out and then we'll come back. And Pharaoh goes, no. Of course, he's got these questions about who is this God of yours? Because you see, in Egypt, they believed that there were lots of gods and none of them were the real God. In fact, Pharaoh thought he was a god, and that's the way he would act. So he's thinking, I don't have to do all of this. And he goes, okay, the Israelites are just lazy. He sends Moses and Aaron packing. He goes, they're lazy, and that's what all this is about. And he tells his guys in charge, all right, tell the Israelites you still have to make bricks. Of course, bricks were needed for building projects. And with the brick, they would bring the soil or clay together and they would use straw in it. Well, the Egyptians had been providing the straw, but now they're saying, okay, you're going to have to find your own straw from now on, but you still have to make the same number of bricks each day. Well, that's pretty much an impossible task. He's already working them from dawn to dark. So now a lot of the Israelites are upset about this. And this is about the point where I'm going to close the story because so far we've seen all of these things that God is setting up, but nothing has paid off at this time. Nothing has happened to give the Israelites any idea that things are going to get better. They're actually worse for them, but they don't understand how God works because once Pharaoh takes it to the next level, that's the evidence that this is a bad guy. If they thought he was bad before, it's even worse now. And we're also seeing a little bit of what will happen eventually with the Israelites when they start having problems with God's authority later on. But right now, I'm going to stop because everything looks bad. But God has not revealed his plan. He's picking a fight with not just Pharaoh, but the Egyptian gods. And they're going to fall right into the trap. So with that, I'm going to close with this, showing you my tie. This is the flame tie to remind us of the burning bush where all of this gets started. And you come back for the next lesson and you'll see how this starts to work itself out. See you then. Bye.